I'm joined in studio this morning by an author who he's not a newcomer to this. He's been on the radio before, and he writes about history of especially this area. We'd like to welcome Ron Yates to the program. It's 46 right now, and 6 minutes after 9 o'clock. First of all, welcome. We've been trying to put this together. You'll have to pull the mic a little closer, but we've been trying to put this together about 3 weeks. But it's the closer we got to a book signing you've got coming up, we decided it was time to do this. This coming Saturday, right?
That's correct, Bill. This coming Saturday, March 25th, from actually there are two different events. The first event, it'll just be me hosting the event at the Twin Falls Visitor Center next to the Prime Bridge, and that's from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. And then I join five other history authors at the Twin Falls County Historical Museum west of Twin Falls, and that'll be a lot of fun because we have different interests and different topics. And that will be from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock this coming Saturday.
No day off for you.
Uh, well, that's all right. It's
The
all fun.
latest book. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, this is the latest book, and it is my first book, and this is entitled "The Prime Stagecoach: A Historical Review," and it's something that hadn't been done before. And my belief here is that if we had no stagecoach, we'd have no Twin Falls. And interestingly enough, I discovered that at such a point in time when Perrine was creating his Blue Lake Ranch, and one day he wanted to go to Shoshone, and there was a stagecoach operating between Shoshone Falls and Shoshone, and he got up on top of the canyon and waited for the stage to go by, and had $2. And at that point in time, $2 wasn't enough for the fare, and an IOU wasn't going to make it. So the stage driver at the time said, "I'm not going to take you for that." And he was slighted. He was somewhat angry about it. And it motivated him to vow that someday he would own that stagecoach. And this is something that I've discovered, and I thought that was really interesting. And from that point in time, he he had his eyes set differently, of course, to own a stagecoach, but he was a successful farmer and rancher, and he did some placer mining down in the canyon as well. So from that point, more and more tourists began to arrive at the falls, and he began to meet more and more people who were influential in finance and people from the East, people from the Midwest, bankers and such. And that led him to make more connections, and he was always looking for a better way to do things. And so as things fell into place, this experience of being slighted by a one stagecoach driver and then him purchasing a stagecoach and operating it and then entertaining well-to-do guests, it all led to the irrigation tract eventually when he filed on the water on the north side and the south side at Milner. He had the great idea that was actually created by someone else earlier, but he followed up on it. He found the money, and and the rest is history, as they say. But it all happened at that one motivational moment in time when one stagecoach driver and owner decided that he didn't have the fare, and that was an interesting find. And some of the things I've documented in this haven't been disclosed previously by other authors. One thing that I was able to determine for certain that Perrine arrived a year before anyone else had placed him in Idaho. And every fact that I discovered that was new, Bill, led to another fact that was new. And I found it really exciting. Some people think, well, history, that's kind of a dry subject. But if you look at anybody's home and their mantle, and they're historians themselves, and maybe they don't realize it, but they have photographs of family. Anyone with a smartphone nowadays is a historian every time they click a shutter and make a photograph. And we archive history in our own way and our own interests. And this is my interest, early Twin Falls history. Um, and as I started to see the stagecoach being restored for the second time and placed in the visitor center, I discovered there was something missing. There wasn't enough information about the importance of the stagecoach and the operator, the owner of IB Perrine, and how it really brought him into the forefront of being able to develop the Twin Falls track eventually. So I decided for two reasons. The first reason, there wasn't enough information about the stagecoach, just a few paragraphs. People arrive at the bridge, they see the jumpers, they see the canyon, they see a lot of tremendous, wonderful sights and friendly people here in Twin Falls, and they're amazed by that. But what's this stagecoach doing here? And it just wasn't getting the explanation that it deserved, I felt. The second reason, Bill, um, I'm a collector of historical artifacts and photographs of this area, and I coincidentally was introduced to a stagecoach pass from 1904 for the that was issued to the governor of Idaho at the time because he was helping promote the irrigation tract, and I bought into this piece of paper for a tremendous amount of money because it's a valuable artifact. And a week later, I was introduced to another. Actually, it was a two-sided business advertisement for the Bryan stagecoach that was given to passenger of the Oregon Short Line Railroad, and hoping that they would divert and come into from Shoshone into the Shoshone Falls and take the tour. Well, now I had this large investment of money into the two pieces of paper, and I thought, well, maybe I can take these, and I know where are many different photographs that are relevant. So by compiling all of this information, hopefully I'll get my investment back.
Well,
So
talking about the stagecoaches, I understand you had to go down a grade, cross the river, and then back up another grade. This was not an easy trip to make.
no, it was a strenuous place. The horses were rested, of course, when it crossed the Shoshone grade. They were probably rested on their trip across the ferry, which was probably a little bit unnerving for a horse, as it pitched in the wind and the waves. And Perrine created his own crossing at Blue Lakes, and they would had quite a strenuous. That was a very demanding trip going either direction, north or south. And the hairpin turn that you still see as you descend on the north side into the Blue Lakes Country Club, that hairpin turn, if you can imagine that gravel, steep, and dirt, and being pulled by 4 to 6 horses up that, or even more frightening, probably going around it on the downhill side.
Hmm.
Um, it was quite a an event, and Ryan was um, very good at making the road and grading. He was complimented many times by different engineers about his achievement. Um,
The ride, of course, you didn't have shock absorbers, and so for a passenger, going down that grade sometimes, I get white knuckles just driving it, and I've got good brakes, and I've got a seat belt on, I've got good struts on the car, but doing that in a stagecoach had to be nobody who went up and down that grade obviously was a coward, if you will.
Probably not. They were determined to arrive where they wanted to be. The stagecoach that's on display at the visitor center was a Concorde, and it was a very it was a top of the line at the time, and it did sway and give much like a car with shock absorbers now, um, and it it would carry the baggage and 17 passengers. If you can imagine, 9 people inside, 3 on the back, 3 on the front, and 2 next to the driver and the driver itself. So with the weight involved and the leather straps that came and gave it the shock absorbing, it simply swayed and turned and bucked, and it made the trip more comfortably than a common mud wagon would or a buckboard wagon. Um, but you're right. It would be a memorable experience, even just going down Blue Lakes in this. It would be something to remember. Um, in fact, in my research, Bill, I discovered 3 firsthand accounts of riding the stagecoach from Shoshone to the Falls in 3 different eras, and vivid explanations of what they discovered for the first time, and the monotony of the landscape, the dust, the bounce, and uh, and the danger, and different things like that. So the book explains a lot of things that I feel that are very much of interest and not really recorded anywhere else.
Want to point out, Ron Yates is our guest in the studio. It's at 9:16, and you're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Bill Colley. And we're at 46. I heard a story. I was out on the river one time on a boat tour that in the days of the old Oregon Trail, you had a choice of paying a few dollars to cross the river out near Hagerman Springs or Thousand Springs, or you could take several days to travel around. And it was a tough choice for people because a few dollars in that era, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, I think that perhaps if the people knew that the risk was less, for sure, on the ferry in the Thousand Springs area and also near Buell, the Oregon Trail actually crossed below that in Glens Ferry, and the ferry, well, was later named Glens Ferry, I should say. The ferry near Buell came along later, but even later travelers would opt for the ferry, for example, Stars Ferry in Burley, because the crossing, whether it's shallow or not, the current couldn't be trusted. The stock might drown, different things like that. So life was an adventure there at that
You didn't
era.
have a tour guide that you could refer to.
Certainly not. And I'm sure a lot of travelers questioned whatever guide they had.
Yeah.
Are you sure we're going to do this? And the reenactment that happened at Glenns Ferry for the Three Island Crossing was ended several years ago. I think probably for the danger and maybe a little bit of lack of interest, but even over 100 years later, it was a very exciting thing for spectators and the people who braved the current.
If people can't make the book signing this weekend, where could they pick up a copy?
Well, fortunately, I've been blessed with a lot of different outlets for the book, especially in downtown Twin Falls. So what we have a number of them, which I would start off with: Save More Drug on Main, Rudy's, Super Ads, Susan's Antiques. The Twin Falls Canal Company has copies. The Twin Falls Senior Center and the Twin Falls Public Library. Um, the Herritt Center for Arts and Science also has a number of copies in their gift shop. And outside of Twin Falls, in Shoshone is where it all started. The second time around, Antique Mall and Chapter One Bookstore in Ketchum. So I'm very thankful that I have outlet for the book, and we've been having a good interest in the books for almost a year now that it's been released.
And again, it's Perrine Stagecoach for anyone looking for a copy of it.
Yes, and it's a it's really designed for the tourist market because it's available at the Stagecoach. It's short. It's about 40 pages, and it's quick and to the point. Many fascinating photographs.
They could read it in their hotels when they come into town, buy it and read it.
Yes, buy two copies for one for a friend.
Yeah. Well, can you stick around for a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Bill.
We're at nine, coming up on 9:20. It's 46 right now, and of course, Ron Yates, historian in studio with us. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. Author and historian Ron Yates joining us in studio. He's with us for a few more minutes this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well. I was going to say along for the ride, but at this time of the morning, a lot of people are already settled in wherever they're going. Um, we were talking during the break about how it hasn't really been very long, in especially even in American history terms, that people of European descent have been in this area, but how already rich the history is through the Magic Valley, especially in what 120 years maybe of people being in the area, at least in larger numbers.
Correct. Yeah, I think the population really grew from 1910 forward. A big boom from 1906 to 1910, and then until 1920 again. It doubled. But previous to that, many of the Oregon Trail pioneers came through the area, but they bypassed this area, not knowing what was beyond the horizon, and they stayed with their plan of going and arriving in California or Oregon or Washington Territory. And what really brought the Europeans, I think, to the area from probably from California and Oregon were the miners. They arrived in Atlanta and Haley and Bullion, Idaho City, of course. Pierce was the first place in Idaho where gold was discovered. And so this same crowd, if you will, went from camp to camp to camp looking for the bonanza. And from there, people began to look around and say, well, we could pasture stock here, we could do this. And keeping in mind that we can jump in our automobile today and arrive somewhere in a minute or moments, and just all the feed we have to fuel that automobile with is gasoline. If you had a horse, you'd have to feed it, you have to
Mhm.
water it, you have to care for it. So these were really hardy individuals in the day. And when they began to see better opportunities for agriculture and things like that, and irrigation, it really changed the way things laid out in our area, which was originally bypassed for many years. In this area, cattlemen grazed open range. The Albion Valley in Oakley was settled earlier than here, and really the only reason Shoshone existed because there was water available there for the railroad when the railroad arrived in 1883. And I would say that Shoshone was the terminus of the railroad because they were servicing the mines in Haley. They built to Shoshone and through Richfield, Peekaboo, and up to Bellevue and Haley to bring the ore out. That was the economic standpoint, and where the money was, that's where we would develop first. And um, other ethnicities came to create the canal system and also the Salmon Falls Dam down near Rogerson. A lot of Greek workers and so forth were um, involved in that. So it was kind of a melting pot right here in this area for us.
From what I understand, it was difficult in the beginning. The first LDS settlers decided to go home because it was so dry. And then later, when someone said, you know what, we'll irrigate it, and they started digging canals, was what really opened things up. But I don't think it's probably uncommon where sometimes the first pioneers will just suddenly throw in the towel, and then somebody else comes up with a better idea.
That's probably correct. The easy water was upstream around Idaho Falls and Fort Hall, different places like that. A lot of irrigation was taking place for years up there prior to here. In the Oakley area in Albion, it was you had to have a creek that you could divert to irrigate crops, and the higher elevation there limited to grain and maybe some alfalfa, but corn and different things wasn't really a crop. And so farmers were really wise and very frugal, and they would put their energy where they could get something back from it. Um, and as far as like the LDS immigration, LDS in the southeast part of the state inhabited certain areas, and they were sent forth by the church to inhabit these areas and develop a community. Chesterfield was one of the first. It was a very difficult place to survive there because of the elevation and different things. But that church particularly spread out eventually, but they were probably third or fourth in line, that population of people, to people that came from the Midwest and from Oregon.
If you can grab the headset for a minute, I believe we have a telephone caller at 927. You're up next. You're on KLIX with Ron Yates.
Yes, this stuff is so fascinating, and I was just curious. Could you confirm for me that so much of the canals and the coulees and the ditches even, but mostly the canals were dug and built by one horse Fresnos? Is that right? I'll hang up. Thanks.
Yes, sir. That is correct. There was a lot of Fresno work. In fact, there's a number of different photographs I've viewed that the Fresno was um, a, well, this was an oversized shovel that was dragged behind a horse, and it had wheelbarrow type handles. And these devices were dragged behind the horse, and then they would be filled relatively soon, and up to the top of the canal bank, and then emptied and back down, and make more excavation. Many of the basements in Twin Falls City were dug by Fresnos, and there was a slope on one end of the basement of the excavation, just like on a canal. You would take that, follow that Fresno up, follow the horse with your Fresno up to the top of the excavation, and deposit the dirt in the appropriate spot. As one horse would do that, and then when there were teams of horses, they would grade and move soil. For example, there was a tremendous photograph in my memory that I saw of the Jerome. There was a reservoir on the north side of Jerome and east of Jerome that failed, and the Fresnos were larger and driven by teams and teams of horses, and also steam tractors. And if you can imagine just moving a wheelbarrow of earth,
Hmm.
and how many billions and billions and billions of those wheelbarrows or Fresno loads or just tremendous amount of work. But I think when these people, when they saw what they were able to do, and they were satisfied with the work and they were well paid. Um, and hey, we've done it. They were very happy and it was working for them. So a lot of
Yeah.
work
So those generations could see the fruits of their labors play out in front of them.
in a day's time.
We want to
Yeah.
thank you again for dropping by.
And thank you, Bill. I very much appreciate the time here and look forward to meeting new people with my book.
All right, super. I want to thank Ron Yates for popping in. Coming up on 9:30, it's 45. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.